Okay, so today we're going to jump right into a deep dive into a case that I think you're going to find really interesting and disturbing.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and this one is a little bit different because we are sourcing a lot of this information from a variety of different Reddit threads.
Okay.
So the first one is unresolved mysteries. We've got serial killers and true crime, and basically what we're doing is piecing together a lot of different um, information,
Yeah.
from a lot of different people, and we're gonna try to make some sense of it today. So this is the story of William Felix Vale Sr., but most people just refer to him as Felix Vale.
Okay.
And this guy he's a character man.
All right.
So it starts back in 1962 with the death of his first wife, Mary Holton Vale.
Okay.
She was a former homecoming queen. They got married in July of 1961. And in 1962, they welcomed their son into the world, William Vale Jr., but they just called him Bill. And then just a few months after Bill was born, on October 28th, 1962, Mary died in the Calcasieu River in Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
And so that is sort of the beginning of this story.
Right.
But according to Felix's account, it was an accident.
Okay.
They were out fishing, they were running trot lines, and he said that he swerved the boat to avoid a stump, and Mary fell overboard and drowned.
Oh, geez.
So,
So she drowned.
yeah,
Okay.
her body was recovered 2 days later.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Almost immediately, there were a bunch of inconsistencies that started popping up.
Like what?
Like the fishing tackle was dry at the boat. There was no indication that the boat had capsized or,
Right.
taken on any water.
Right.
And even Felix's cigarettes that were in his pocket were dry.
So he's saying that
So all of that directly contradicted his claim that he had,
dove in after her.
dove in to save her,
Yeah. Right. So.
That's suspicious.
Yeah, and there was a lot of chatter about this on Reddit, I bet. And, in those early days of this case, it was really interesting to see how people were picking up on this stuff.
Right. So the local authorities, they did arrest him
Okay.
based on these inconsistencies, but the district attorney at the time decided not to prosecute.
Oh, wow.
And in 1963, a grand jury concluded that there wasn't sufficient evidence to bring charges, and so Felix was released.
Wow.
So he moves to Mississippi with his son, Bill, and basically the death of Mary Horton Vale became a cold case.
So for years, nothing really happened.
Yeah, for years nothing happened, but this is where the story gets really interesting because, sometimes these cold cases, they heat up again.
Yeah, I mean, people don't forget, right?
They don't forget. And in recent years, we've seen social media really help bring attention
Oh, yeah.
to a lot of these cold cases. And, in a way, that's kind of what these Reddit threads are doing,
It's like crowdsourced investigation.
Yeah, it's like a huge, think tank,
Yeah.
of people just trying to figure stuff out.
Totally.
So anyway, the doubts surrounding Mary's death, they start to pick up again when a former roommate of Felix's named Isaac Absher comes forward.
Okay.
And he's got some really disturbing recollections about Mary's body when he saw it after he, had been pulled out of the river.
Oh, wow. This is getting creepy.
Yeah, so he specifically remembers her arms being crossed and what seemed like a scarf stuffed in her mouth, and there were noticeable bruises on her head.
I mean, that's not...
Not an accidental drowning.
No, not at all.
Right. And it's interesting because, in the Reddit threads, there's all this discussion about, could somebody have done this to her after she was already dead? You
Right.
know, and there are people who are saying, no way, if her arms were crossed and a scarf was stuffed in her mouth, that had to happen before she died.
Yeah,
So it's really interesting.
it is. And especially the head bruises. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
that's huge.
I mean, that's a sign of blood force trauma,
Yeah.
and
So she could have been a...
she could have been dead before she even went in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but it wasn't just Absher who had suspicions.
Really?
Even among some of the original investigators, there was this sense that something wasn't right.
Right.
There was this guy named Rabbit Manuel.
Rabbit Manual.
Yeah, he was an investigator, and he always felt like,
Like Felix was guilty.
yeah, he always thought that Felix had something to do with it.
Wow.
But, back then, they just didn't have the evidence, They
Right.
didn't have the science, the forensics.
Yeah.
So
They couldn't prove it.
they couldn't prove it, but then in 1970, a bombshell drops.
What?
Felix's son, Bill, who was 8 years old at the time, told authorities that he had overheard Felix confessing to his girlfriend, Sharon Hensley, that he murdered Mary.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so imagine that you're this little kid and you hear your dad confessing to murdering your mom.
That's a heavy burden.
It's a huge burden,
Yeah.
and Bill held on to that for years,
Wow.
before he finally told anybody.
Yeah.
But it did lead to Mary's case being reopened, but get this, no charges were filed.
What? How is that possible?
I don't know. This is one of the strange things about this case, but it gets even weirder.
Okay.
Just a few years later, in 1973, Sharon Hensley, the woman who Felix confessed to, disappears.
Wait, so the girlfriend he confessed to disappeared?
Gone vanished.
Oh, my God.
And so now you've got another woman
In his
who's
life?
close to him,
Yeah.
who just vanishes without a trace.
Oh, this guy's bad news.
Yeah, so of course everybody's like, what the heck is going on? But
Yeah.
Felix had an explanation.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He told Sharon's family that she had decided to leave for Key West, Florida,
Okay.
with an Australian couple she had just met,
Okay.
John and Vanessa,
John and Vanessa.
and that they were going to sail around the world.
Oh, come on.
And he also said that Sharon had burned all of her identifications.
So she could start a new life.
Right, so a clean break and a fresh start.
Okay, that sounds super fishy.
Super fishy. And if you read the Reddit threads about this case, everybody's like, no way this happened.
It's a little too convenient, isn't it?
A little too convenient.
Yeah.
But there was one final piece of contact from Sharon.
Okay.
Her mother received a very strange phone call
Oh, really?
where Sharon mentioned that she was planning to make pornographic films with Felix.
What?
Yeah, and her mother was like, this is not like my daughter at all, you know?
Right.
And she kind of felt like it was a cry for help.
Like she was being forced into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's so creepy.
And that was the last time anybody ever heard from Sharon Hensley.
Wow.
So we jump forward again to 1981.
Okay.
And Felix is now 44 years old, and he meets 15-year-old Annette Craver in California.
Hold on, 15 years old?
Yeah.
He's 44.
Yeah.
This guy's got a thing for younger women.
Well, they ended up getting married in 1983.
When she was 17.
17, yeah. And Annette's mother, Mary Rose, she was not happy about this at all, but she reluctantly consented to the marriage.
I bet she wasn't happy about that.
No, she wasn't. But and you know, this is another thing that people on Reddit talk a lot about.
Oh, I bet they do.
Yeah, like the age gap,
Yep.
and you know, the fact that, you know, there's this pattern of him being with these women and then they disappear.
And he's always got some kind of explanation.
Right. He's always got some kind of story, you know.
But it never adds up.
It never quite adds up.
Right.
So in October 1984, Annette Craver disappears.
This is insane.
And Felix tells her mother, Mary Rose, that he dropped Annette off at a bus station in St. Louis after she decided to leave him,
Oh, come on.
and that she might be headed to Mexico,
Uh-huh.
possibly with some inheritance money that she had gotten.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
So is that the story he's sticking with?
pretty much.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, but Mary Rose, she did not believe this for a second.
Good for her.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine?
I mean, come
Your
on.
daughter just vanishes.
Yeah, and this guy has a history.
And this guy has a history, right?
Yeah.
So she spends decades looking for her daughter,
Wow.
trying to find out what happened.
And nothing ever turned up.
Well, no, we'll get to that in a minute, but it's important to note that, you know, Mary Rose...
She never gave up.
She never gave up.
Wow. That's...
And people on Reddit just love her. You know,
Yeah.
they think she's a hero because she never stopped fighting for her daughter.
Right.
So,
So what happened?
so in 2012, this investigative journalist named Jerry Mitchell,
Okay.
he publishes this huge expose
Oh, wow.
in the Clarion Ledger, and it's called Gone.
Dawn. Okay.
And in this article, he connects all three cases:
Oh, wow.
Mary Horton Vale, Sharon Hensley, and Annette Craver.
So this journalist, he put it all together.
He put it all together, and it was a really big deal because it kind of brought all of this back into the public consciousness.
Right.
And, you know, people were outraged.
I bet they were.
I mean, how could this
Get
thing
away with this for so long.
get away with this for so long, right?
Yeah.
So as a result of this article, they decide to re-examine Mary Horton Vale's original autopsy report.
Okay.
And this forensic pathologist named Dr. Michael Baden,
Okay.
he looks at the report and he concludes that her death was a homicide.
Oh, wow.
And he based this on the bruises that were on her body and the scarf that had been stuffed in her mouth.
Right.
Remember Isaac Absher talked about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I remember.
So all of a sudden, this, you know, decades-old case
Yeah.
has new life breathed into it.
Right.
And in 2013, Felix Vale is arrested in Texas
Okay.
and charged with the second-degree murder of Mary Horton Vale
Wow.
50 years after her death.
50 years later.
I mean, that's insane.
That's incredible.
And the trial starts on August 8, 2016,
Okay.
in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Uh-huh.
And during the trial, the prosecution presented evidence related to Mary's death, of course, but they also introduced information about the disappearances of Sharon Hensley and Annette Craver.
Oh, so they wanted to show a pattern.
Exactly. They wanted to show that this wasn't just a one-time thing,
Right.
that this was a pattern of behavior.
Even though he wasn't charged with those?
Right. He wasn't charged with those, but they wanted to show the jury
Right.
that this guy had a history of...
Making women disappear.
Exactly. And the jury deliberated for less than 30 minutes before finding him guilty.
Wow.
And so at the age of 76, William Felix Vale Sr. was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So he finally got what he deserved.
He finally got what he deserved, and, the verdict was upheld by Louisiana courts in 2017 and 2018, so there was no getting out of this one.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there because thanks to these Reddit threads,
Okay.
even more information has come to light.
Like what?
Well, there were accusations of child molestation against Felix dating back to the 1980s.
Oh, my God.
But the statute of limitations had expired, so he couldn't be prosecuted for those.
So he got away with that?
Yeah, he got away with that, but it just shows you, the kind of person he was.
Yeah, this guy's a monster.
And then there's this really sad part of the story.
Okay.
Felix's son, Bill, died of cancer in 2009.
Oh.
But before he died, he recorded a video.
Oh, wow.
And in the video, he talks about how Felix confessed to him about murdering Mary, and he also talks about how he was abused by Felix.
That's so sad.
It's so sad. And, Bill says in the video that he believes 100% that his father killed his mother.
Wow, so he carried that with him.
His whole life, yeah.
Wow.
And, the people on Reddit, they really admire Bill for his courage.
Yeah.
For coming forward.
It's hard to stand up to your own parents.
Especially when they're like that,
Right.
So, people also talk a lot about Felix's personality on Reddit.
What was he like?
Well, apparently he was very charming and manipulative.
Oh, so he could talk his way out of things.
Exactly. And he was married at least 7 times.
7 times.
At least 7 times.
This guy.
So, you can just imagine the damage that he left in his wife.
I mean, he's a serial, what do they call it?
A serial husband, I guess.
Yeah, but also maybe a serial killer.
Yeah, possibly.
We don't know about Sharon and Annette.
We don't, but
it's suspicious.
It's suspicious. And, this case is often cited as having the longest gap between a murder and a conviction in U.S. history.
How long was it?
54 years.
54 years.
Yeah, that's insane.
So, the general consensus on Reddit is that Felix is probably responsible for the disappearances of Sharon and Annette.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Even though they never found their bodies,
Right.
the circumstantial evidence is pretty strong.
Yeah. And the pattern of behavior.
Yeah, and people also really admire Mary Rose.
Yeah.
For her persistence,
Yeah.
for never giving up on trying to find out what happened to her daughter.
Right.
And it's sad, that Felix Vale lived such a long life.
And got away with so much for so long.
Yeah, and he actually outlived his own son.
Oh, wow. That's really sad.
It's sad, and he died in prison.
Oh, so he died in prison.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, it's a weird case, man. It's a crazy case.
It's a crazy case. It's a sad case.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of hopeful in a way because it shows that, even after 50 years...
Justice can be served.
Justice can be served.
Right.
So, we still don't know what happened to Sharon and Annette, and that's kind of the unresolved mystery part of this.
Yeah.
But, it's pretty clear that Felix Vale was a bad dude.
Oh, he was a bad guy.
And, I think that the work that these Reddit communities are doing is really important because they're keeping these cases alive.
Yeah, and they're bringing attention to them.
Yeah, and they're helping to find answers.
Right.
And I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's the story of William Felix Vale Sr.
A very disturbing story.
Yeah, very disturbing. And I think, one of the things that we can take away from this is that, justice can be delayed.
But it's not always denied.
It's not always denied, and, even though it took 50 years for Felix Vale to finally face justice for the murder of Mary Horton Vale, he did eventually face justice.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to remember.
It is.
And, I think about Mary Rose and how she never gave up hope.
Right.
And I think that's something that we can all learn from.
Absolutely.
Never give up hope.
Yeah, and never stop searching for answers.
Yeah, because you never know. One day those answers might just come.
Right.
And, I think about Sharon and Annette, and I think about their families.
Yeah.
And I hope that one day they get the answers that they're looking for.
I hope so, too.
So that's it for our deep dive today.
Well, that was intense.
It was intense, but it was also really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to talk about these cases.
It is.
To keep them alive.
Yeah, to keep the memory of the victims alive.
Exactly. And to remind people that, these things happen.
Yeah.
And we need to be vigilant.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.